Daily Tech News Show is made possible by you listening right now. Thank you, Mike Akins, Norm Fazekas, Logan Larson, and 2 brand new patrons. Everybody welcome Eric and Mike. Woo-hoo. Welcome, Eric. Mike, come on in. Have a seat. On this episode of DTNS, quantum computing just got a lot closer thanks to Google. Reddit has its own search chatbot now, and we celebrate 20 years since Webster declared blog its word of the year. This is the Daily Tech News for Monday, December 9th, 2024. In Los Angeles, I'm Tom Merritt.
I'm the show's producer, Roger Chang.
And joining us, lead writer and correspondent for Bloomberg Originals, Nate Lanxon. Welcome back.
Thank you. How are you doing?
We're doing well. We're doing well. Thank you for being here. And thank you for bringing blog as the word of the year for our discussion. That's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that.
20 years ago.
I was just wondering if Webster has picked its word of the year this year yet, and they did. Polarization.
That's going to be quite polarizing.
They just announced it, actually, like 6 minutes ago as we're recording this. Demure, totality, and Allison were also, thrown out there as contenders. But I don't know if I like polarization as the word of the year.
And if I say I do, and then we are polarized. Also, none of those new words are new.
Demure. I guess demure is a new usage, right?
But so what is the new usage?
The demure and mindful thing,
That is new to me. That sounds like it would have been a thing.
It was, in fact.
It sounds like I would have heard this.
It's a thing.meet. Go check it out. All right, let's start with the quick hits. Starting Monday, paying users of ChatGPT Plus or Pro in most countries, although sorry, Nate, not the UK or Europe for that matter, can start using the public version of OpenAI's text-to-video generator called Sora. OpenAI says this is powered by Sora Turbo, which is faster, but still has limitations. OpenAI says it sometimes has, quote, unrealistic physics and struggles with complex actions over long durations. It can generate 1080p videos up to 20 seconds long, but if you're a Plus subscriber, you're limited to either 50 480p videos a month or fewer than 50 720p videos. If you want 1080p, you got to be a Pro subscriber, and then you get 10 times as much usage. Video outputs are watermarked and are also using C2PA metadata. China's State Administration for Market Regulation is investigating whether NVIDIA's acquisition of Mellanox Technologies violates Chinese antitrust laws. Merger was approved by China in 2020 on the agreement to 7 conditions, among which was an assurance that there would be no interruption in the supply of GPUs and networking equipment to China. Now, the regulator did not publish what has raised its suspicions, but a lot of folks believe it is part of the trade fight between the U.S. and China and goes right after China recently placed restrictions on the export of certain rare earth metals used in the manufacture of electronics. Raspberry Pi announced the new Raspberry Pi 500, the latest version of its computer in a keyboard. Comes with a 2.4 gigahertz 64-bit quad-core ARM Cortex-A76 processor and 8 gigs of RAM. The Raspberry Pi 500 is available for $90. Now, that's $20 more than the 400 sold for, but the 400's sticking around and even getting a price reduction. You can buy the old version for $60. If you want the 500 with a mouse, USB-C power supply cable, and micro HDMI cable, they'll bundle that in for $120. You pay $30 extra for that. And while they're at it, there's a new $100 Raspberry Pi 15.6-inch monitor with built-in speakers. It can be powered directly from the USB port. ByteDance is not waiting to hear if the Supreme Court's going to take up its case. The company just filed a request with the Court of Appeals of the D.C. Circuit in the U.S., asking that the effect of the law that could prohibit the distribution of TikTok in the U.S. on January 19th be paused. ByteDance argues that it thinks it has a fair chance of winning its case in the Supreme Court, but it needs time for an orderly hearing of its case. And it argued it poses no imminent security threat, but a prohibition on its distribution while this worked its way through the courts would cause irreparable harm to its business. If the U.S. Supreme Court agrees to hear ByteDance's appeal, it would likely not rule on it until mid-year. So that's the issue here. Finally, Blue Sky has posted mock-ups of its upcoming subscription service on GitHub. It's just a user interface design, so these actual features might just be for the design. They not necessarily the features they'll launch with, but it's interesting to see what's on there. It shows subscribers would get higher quality video uploads and profile customizations, something that Blue Sky has said it would deliver in a subscription. Custom app icons were also on there, a profile badge, kind of a verification style scheme, and then inline post translations, analytics, and bookmark folders were listed as features coming soon in the mockup. It also showed a price of $8 a month or $72 a year. Google announced that its 105-qubit Willow quantum chip breaks the QEC threshold, the quantum error correction threshold, meaning the need for error correction reduces as the number of qubits increase. It can solve a benchmark algorithm problem in 5 minutes that would take the Frontier supercomputer, which up until recently was the fastest, but still currently the second fastest supercomputer on the planet. It would take that Frontier supercomputer 10 septillion years to solve. Nate, I don't think I will be around to see if a classical computer were to finish that.
No, I doubt I will be either. But I think the significant thing here is that this was stable for like an hour. And a lot of these qubits, they are not stable for a very, very long time. That seems to be the big breakthrough here. Like this theoretical total processing power is one thing, but the stability of the qubit itself is actually pretty good. Ars Technica leads on this as well.
The 105 qubits basically make one stable qubit, right? Because they all error correct for each other.
Yeah, which is impressive. But also, there is no application for this right now. This is all pure theory. It's a big number, it's a bit of a PR thing, but it is genuinely, I think, from what I've read about this, a step forward and a significant one.
Yeah, there are some practical uses, even of the previous version, Sycamore, that did not have this level of error correction. But the problem was those practical uses could also be done by classical computers. They might be done a little faster by the quantum computer, but you really didn't need the quantum computer to do them. So it's one of those things where you're like, well, the quantum computer isn't useless. It can do things, but it can't necessarily do things better yet. This passing the QEC threshold means that Google thinks by the end of the decade, it can actually have a computer that would be able to be used in a way that would be perfectly error corrected and therefore far outpace it would be fault tolerant. So it would far outpace what classical computers could do. And they even think they could probably get it to do a benchmark that does useful output by the end of next year.
I mean, by the end of the decade, that's really not that far away. That is a depressingly close milestone in terms of being the end of a decade. 5 years, I could see it, I suppose, but yeah, that's pretty incredible.
What it tells me is that we need to actually really start preparing for a world with quantum computers. Quantum computers are not good at the same things as classical computers. So we're not talking about the fact like, oh, I just need to replace all my computers with quantum computers. Quantum computers are good at very specific things, like, for instance, cryptography. And so, NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology here in the U.S., put out quantum-resistant encryption standards recently because anything that is encrypted with current encryption standards that aren't quantum resistant would be able to be broken easily once quantum computers become available.
Yeah, and I think, at the moment, most of our security methods are based on being prohibitively costly or energy intensive in order to crack in a reasonable amount or useful amount of time. And so a lot of the theory here is, well, if you remove the limit of computing power, then suddenly everything we've got is basically very crackable in very layman's terms. As I know you like to point out, there'll be people going, but, and I'm sure there are those people. But that is like the very basic version of the situation. So it's also very hard to run these things, and they're going to be very, very expensive for a very, very long time. So there's kind of a natural inhibition that a lot of these technologies are going to have, which is that, yes, they could technically maybe do this, but then who's got them? And how did they get them? And
in fact,
that's going to be a lot further away.
That was one of the things that Google Quantum AI was talking about, was they actually, because they reached this quantum error correction threshold, think it's finally worth thinking about finance. It's finally worth thinking about, practical cost and bringing these to a position where businesses could afford them. That certainly isn't going to make them cheap for all of us to use, but it could make it so that businesses could be able to take advantage of these. Up until now, it's kind of been scientific and academic endeavors that have taken any advantage of what quantum computers can do, simply because it wasn't cost effective. So it's more a handshake agreement of like, we're going to let you use this to prove what it's good at, which is good for Google. But they're getting to the point where they think, oh, we might actually be able to create a small business around this. And by small, I don't mean a small business. I mean a business that doesn't generate a whole lot of revenue yet.
Yeah, which is a proof of concept in and of itself in a way. But if it is at that point, that is a pretty remarkable step forward for the technology that I think even in our lifetimes, end of the decade stuff notwithstanding, even in our lifetimes, we will look back on with the same way we look back on the early era of blogging. Slight prediction of what we're going to talk about later.
Exactly.
And it's like, wow, that was so old and that was so archaic. And would we have imagined then what we have now? No, we'd have thought it was ridiculous and very, very hard to imagine. So never bet against the future.
Yeah. No, great. No, very, I often think, like, in the 60s, a classical computer required you to be a huge business and get a mainframe and maybe even rent the mainframe. 20 years later, people had them on their desktops. 20 years after that, people carry them around in their pockets. And the phones we carry around our pockets vastly outperform what you had to put in a mainframe back in the 60s. So yeah, we're at that stage of the mainframe with the quantum computer, maybe even the 50s, not the 60s era. But we're starting to see the 70s approach. So get your bell bottoms out. That's what I'm saying. Let's talk about something more practical. Reddit is testing Reddit Answers, a chatbot that lets you ask questions and then uses a generative model to return a summary of relevant threads that address your question. But it's just Reddit. It's saying, based on what people on Reddit are saying, here is a summary of an answer to your question. It's not even trying to be factual. It's saying, this is what folks on Reddit say. Below that summary are quotes from actual user posts, so you can see like, oh, how did they actually phrase it? What did they actually say? As well as links to the full conversations that the chatbot used in its answer. So it's citing where it got it from. To me, this is better than using Google to search Reddit because it's just on Reddit. So it's meant to be the best at finding things on Reddit, although it's a little more narrow than asking Claude or ChatGPT because it can't go find information elsewhere. Features rolling out to a limited number of US users to start and then will expand from there. I know a lot of people just go to Google and say Reddit : blah, 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 or format it correctly, but like just search Reddit, Google. I only want to find answers there. Do you ever do that, Nate?
Yeah, absolutely. It's usually the Reddit is the suffix on the query, how to stop a something Reddit. That is usually a thing. Usually it's my wife, Kate, that finds most of these things, how to fix the boiler. It's usually her. But this seems like a logical step forward for Reddit. I did go back and look at their original press release announcing this, and they did characterize it as an evolution of the search technology, which actually is what this feels much more like. I think comparing it to ChatGPT, Claude, any of these, Perplexity, I suppose, it's not really in that same league, but it's also not trying to be. It's trying to be a quite narrow but good tool, which, if anything, is kind of what a lot of the best, or rather what we think some of the best uses for AI and AI agents in future are going to be, very narrowly focused, specialized domain expertise, it gets called. And in this case, the domain expertise is Reddit and Reddit's users. So it makes sense, but I would struggle to call it a particularly smart bot. He says, having not actually used it, just read 2 stories in a press release, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I do. And I think that's fair, where your expectations may be like, well, the Reddit chatbot didn't know the answer, or the Reddit chatbot, got this part wrong. But if this is implemented the way it looks like it's implemented, like you say, I haven't tried it yet either because it hasn't rolled out to me. But it is just telling you what Reddit says, and Reddit can be wrong. But I think it's easier to wrap your head around that than ChatGPT, which just sounds like it knows everything when all it knows is what the internet was trained on, and the internet can be wrong. I think in the context of Reddit, we're more used to that. We're more used to saying like, well, I am on Reddit, so I will always keep that in mind. But there's some good advice on here and some good facts.
That's very true. I think part of it is an interface thing as well. Searching Reddit on Reddit is not a particularly fun experience. Searching Reddit from Google is often an extremely good way of finding answers on Reddit. So I wonder if this is sort of somewhere to serve the people who want something in a little bit of both. They're hopping mad. They want something in the middle, to quote Alan Partridge. So that's a niche reference for American audiences. I apologize. But I think that is the reality here, is that it's a means to an end, and a very good means.
Yeah. I don't think I saw a few articles out there, comparing it as a competitor. I don't think it's a competitor to any of these other chatbots. I think any more so than Reddit's previous site search was a competitor to Google. It wasn't. It was a way for you to be like, oh, I'm on Reddit. Let me find something on Reddit versus trying to find something on the entire web. Now, Reddit has become somewhat of a substitute for what's on the entire web, right? But that's not what Reddit search was designed for. It was just designed to make you search Reddit. And I think, to go back to what you said earlier, Nate, that's what this is for. This is for helping you find something on Reddit, but it's a little more effective than just a search because it can summarize, which I think might send you into a thread more often than if it wasn't summarized. Because a lot of times I look at threads and I'm like, that one might be good, but I don't have time to investigate. If I've got a good summary, that may convince me, okay, I want to go into the thread and see the nuances of what people said about this.
I can imagine this being thrown forward a little bit. And if you take the responses or you take the answers, is there something that a platform like Reddit could do to make that useful in a way that it couldn't otherwise do? I'm not entirely sure, but I reckon there might be something there.
Yeah. Well, folks, if you would like to talk to us on Reddit, you can go to reddit.com/r/Daily Tech News Show. But we also have a lot of other places you can talk to us. That includes X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. Just look for @DTNS Show, @DTNS Show on all those places. Or if you want to see us in video form, go to TikTok or YouTube, and you can find us there @Daily Tech News Show. 20 years ago this month, Merriam-Webster, not a person, but the company that makes the dictionary, made blog its word of the year. They defined it as online journal where the writer presents a record of activities, thoughts, or beliefs. Now, since that time, blogs have changed a lot. It's hard to tell what's a blog and what's just a website, what's just a newsletter. Nate has been looking into this, went down a little bit of a rabbit hole that brought it to your attention. So first of all, tell us how you came upon realizing that we're at the 20th anniversary of this.
Yeah, I was reading up on some tech history for my podcast after I turned it from being a news show to a nerd nostalgia, some sort of thing. And I'd spotted this old blog reporting that the word blog was Merriam-Webster's dictionary's word of the year for 2004. That's 20 years ago. It made me feel pretty old. I was already feeling quite old because I'm 40 in 6 days. But so I went digging a little bit further down that rabbit hole you mentioned. There was then a New York magazine story. I was going to say New York Times. It was a New York magazine story that had credited the first actual blog as being launched or written in 1994 by this guy called Justin. His page is still online, actually. I looked it up. It's still there. It's pretty dull. So I wondered if there was a more interesting first blog. And I kept on searching. And then I found the Encyclopedia Britannica's assertion that the first blog was actually even earlier than the one in 1994. It was in 92, but that was written by Tim Berners-Lee, who I sort of thought he doesn't get the right to have the first blog. He invented the whole thing. Like, let's not count that. So there's a bit of ambiguity there. But what it did get me thinking was kind of how if you did take 2004, the year it was Word of the Year, as being at least that kind of, we considered things to be peak blog, at least by a dictionary. How different was blogging then to what it is now, which is what started getting me interested in all this, because it seems like kind of an alien concept that's been, I suppose, usurped in a way with other platforms. You mentioned newsletters or Substacks just now, because you're writing, or you were writing, something that is primarily words. Maybe you have a few pictures. You're manually adding tags and links, and then publishing on the hope that someone's going to subscribe to it or is already subscribed, get an email notification, or they'll navigate to it from one of their web browser bookmarks or something, which is just not the case anymore for the vast majority of people. I'm actually still a big RSS user. I know you are as well, Tom. And I looked through my feed list. I'm just looking at it again now here. There are only 2 subscriptions that I'd say are blogs, as in they are written by a person or by a person for a company, that is something that person is doing or looking at or sitting on or eating or something. And the rest are basically descendants of what blogs, what they were. So that's things like, I would say, Engadget or Gizmodo. Like, they did start out as blogs and they've become, huge enterprises in their own right. But they're basically just news sites that still have RSS, and they might be based on a blogging platform like WordPress or something. So it's like bloggers in 2004, they are now, I think, as you said, they are writing Substacks, or they're monologuing into YouTube, or I suppose monologuing into a podcast, or doing lengthy threads on X or Threads, I suppose. And I guess, I want to say, is blogging dead? I learned from years writing for Wired that it's never a smart thing to proclaim that something is dead. And I'm quite sure there are still millions of people writing travel blogs and personal accounts of things that are important to them. But I think the motivation and the reason for doing so, if you're going to do it as a blog, it has to be much more profound than it ever was in the past, because we've now been conditioned to think that the only way something is valuable is if it's reaching the largest number of people, which has to be social media in some form. You can't just assume that someone's going to subscribe to your RSS feed or bookmark your homepage, although I would and do. So that's kind of the background to this.
Yeah. It really is interesting, because by this Webster definition, the Engadget is not a blog. Google's blog is not a blog. Microsoft's blog is not a blog. They are not a journal where the writer presents a record of activities, thoughts, or beliefs. There are still a few out there. The one that came to mind immediately was John Scalzi's Whatever blog, where he very much just talks about daily stuff, some of which is his writing activities because he's an author, but some of which is just his thoughts on whatever's happening that day or what his daughter or his wife is doing. And that is a blog. But I think blog came to mean sort of a journal of updates, in which case I would say that the Google blogs and the Microsoft blogs count as blogs. They're corporate blogs, but they are different than just a list of press releases, right? Like they have a more personal tone. They are updates on what's happening in that company or that division of the company. But really, as you were talking, what I realized is the spiritual successor of blogs is the vlog, where the idea of blogging really survives the strongest, I think, is the vlog, where you have very successful YouTube series that's just a person filming their everyday life. Here's where I went. We call them influencers now, but if they were writing this stuff back in the day, they probably would have been called bloggers.
And it's funny, I was thinking about this. I'm sorry for the TMI, but I was thinking about this in the shower earlier on. And I thought, back in the day, if you worked for a large company and somebody called you a blogger, you would correct them and say, no, sir. No, I'm a journalist. I write stories. You want a blogger who does posts. They're over there in the corner. And, it's very self-righteous, but a lot of people did it, myself included. And I think now there is this kind of weird stigmatism as well, where you don't want to be called an influencer. You might be one, but some people wouldn't want to. And then the people that really do want to be called an influencer, a lot of people judge them for being vacuous and just wanting to be famous, which is a shame, because both back then with blogging and today, influencers are both legitimate forms of, well, I don't want to say reporting as an influencer, but they are legitimate things that some people are very, very good at, make good money from, and have a place in the world. But I think there's stigmatism that comes with the word that has definitely changed over the years. And like right now, if someone said you are a blogger, I mean, I'm not, but if someone said I was, I'd be like, okay, whatever, you're, you stink. It really doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. You need a shower where you will have a revelation on the meaning of blogs. Trust me.
Yeah.
I think back, now that you mentioned that, when Engadget launched, it called itself a blog. So it was clearly not an insult. I remember a point in CNET where it was referred to, I think by Molly, but I don't know for sure, as a blog, and they got upset, as if we were, at CNET dismissing them as just a blog. And nowadays, if you call Engadget a blog, I think they'd just be confused and be like, well, no, not really. Like, I guess we used to be, but it's just a news site now. And I think blog has come to mean a series of semi-regular daily posts, right? Like maybe they're not every day, but they're a post of the day, possibly multiple times a day. But the blog at a company is, here's the record of everything that's happening in this part of the company, or at smaller companies, the company itself. Daily Tech News Show uses WordPress to post its website, and it's in blog format because, we post our episodes daily. But I don't consider it a blog. A blog is more of a diary or journal of some sort that's documenting something. I think that's where I settle on it now. That's what a blog is. It's a tool. It's a piece. It can be its own thing, or it can be a section of another thing.
And it's something that I'm now proactively seeking out. And there's one guy that I used to follow on Instagram who has a blog called Tokyo Times, which, if you like street photography from Tokyo, it's worth pulling up. And just subscribe to his blog as a blog, and it feels quite nice. There's very little evil in a world when you're reading a blog in an RSS reader. It's a bit of escapism, which was never blogging's goal, and no one had a goal really for blogging. But for me, subscribing to some now is a bit of a respite from the busyness of the world.
Well, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on the fact that a lot of what made blogging in its earliest days became what people did on Facebook, what people did on Twitter, and was diffused into social media. And so some of it has come back, like we've touched on a couple of times now, in the form of Substack. But I think there's still a place for that good old fashioned personal blog. So yeah, maybe it's poised to make a comeback. All right, before we wrap up here, let's check out the mailbag. Lynn writes, just listened to the show on Friday and thought about this website where you can try to persuade an AI to give you a password against its instructions not to, which I think is an interesting illustration of AI security. Unless you worry, it's a game website. There's no real passwords involved. Nobody's actually trying to hack into anything. But the idea is, like, can you convince the AI to give you its password, even though it's been told not to? And if you can, it will then use what you did to safeguard itself for the next round. So you'll have to try something else. That's the fun of the game, is keeping to try different strategies. But it also shows how AI can learn while it's being attacked.
Will it help people understand that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is not a good password?
It could. I don't think it will, because I don't think the people who use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as a password will go play Gandalf at AI. Unfortunately.
Well, if people take passwords more seriously, then I'm all for Gandalf and his little game.
Yeah. It certainly is a great way to learn about AI security and what's possible and what's not. I think that's another good part of it. Also, Casey wanted to share this with us. Casey said, I launched ChatGPT this morning asking about the 12 days of OpenAI, or as we've been calling them, the 12 days of Shipmas, because that's what they called it internally, and was pleasantly surprised when your video was put at the bottom of the result. Yeah, it's the short about the 12 days of OpenAI that we posted when they announced it. So look at that. Thank you, Chad GPT, giving us a little shout out there.
That's great. I also liked that it said that you were the official announcement, which is that's pretty amazing.
It does show that hallucinations are still an issue. So
you've made it.
Yeah. And thank you, KC, for sending that along as well. Thank you, Nate, for being here. Before we get out of here, what do you got going on to tell folks about?
Well, I turned text message into a nostalgia podcast, which, trust me, if you want a good way to lose half your audience overnight, turn your news show into not being about news anymore. But it's going well, but it would be great to have some more people checking out things. If you like RSS and old stuff, then it's pretty good. And also for the main things that I do, Bloomberg Originals is where I do all my short films for Bloomberg about a variety of topics, including one recently about the struggles of Volkswagen, which I'd highly recommend if you're interested in Germany or cars or problems. So that's over on YouTube if you search for Bloomberg Originals.
Yep. Good stuff at Bloomberg. Absolutely go check that out. And great episode about dongles recently on uktechshow.com. Thank
you very much.
Very enjoyable. And not for puerile reasons, even though that may have come up at least once. Yeah.
It definitely did.
We've got stickers, folks. Brand new sticker pack has launched, or as the kids say, has dropped at dailytechnewsshow.com/store. We're working with Scott's daughter on this. So if you like the stickers over at Frog Pants, you're going to like these too. Die cut host stickers that were created specifically for us. We've got one of Roger. We've got one of me. We've got one of Sarah. Len Peralta did the art on these. They are $4.99 each or $12.99 for the sticker pack. You can get all three, and the shipping ain't nothing. It's free. Just head on over to dailytechnewsshow.com/store. Patrons, stick around for the extended show. Good day, Internet. Is it worse to text someone the words "call me" or just calling someone with no warning at all? We are going to discuss. You can also catch the show live Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC. Find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live. Back tomorrow. Talk to you then.
The DTNS family of podcasts, helping each other understand.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.